Hello everybody, out in the woods again, and we're going to do a review of Chivalry of a Failed Knight, which is a show I actually really like. And I've been doing a lot of negative anime reviews lately, so I figured I should finally do one that I actually enjoyed. So, unfortunately, Chivalry of a Failed Knight is probably not going to get a season 2. It's like basically every light novel, not visual novel, every light novel that's not Sword Art Online and is not Love Shinobu and Other Delusions, it's not going to get a season 2. It's like there's some other shows I really like Excel World, And You Never Thought There Was a Girl Online. Who knows if and when Goblin Slayer is going to get a season 2. I forget if Girls und Panzer was a light novel or a manga, but it's not going to get a season 2. At best, you get OVAs, and I don't really like OVAs. I prefer kind of a normal show. So that's unfortunate, but I really enjoyed it for what it was, even if we aren't going to get the rest of the series. And I guess in a sense, them not doing a season 2 kind of makes this season based in a way, but we'll get into that. So, Chivalry of a Failed Knight hits a lot of the boxes that I like. It's romantic. I know it might not seem like it, but I really like romantic stuff. Mainly when it's mixed with something else, like slice of life, or fantasy, or sci-fi, or something like that. So it's got that. It takes place in like an alternate high school / university. And I often find those really kind of interesting, just because it gives a good, I guess kind of background setting, where there's lots of a room for kind of downtime and just doing kind of mundane stuff that really kind of fleshes out the characters. Now, in some cases, that's a bad thing. I think it really detracts in the case of Code Geass. But something a bit more slice of lifey, I think it works pretty well for. And it's got fantasy elements. And I think actually the action scenes are really well done in this. Action scenes aren't something I generally comment that much on, because I guess to me they're either sufficient or they're not sufficient. I don't really watch anime for the action scenes. I kind of more watch it for the characters and setting. But I digress. So it's got a lot of the things that I like. Another kind of, I guess, note before we get into this is I think, largely ecchi done right, if that's how you pronounce it. There's a lot of fan service in this show, but it's not overwhelming. Like, there's a beach episode, but it's actually not bad. Well, not a beach episode, but a pool episode. There's a fair amount of ecchi throughout, but it's not overwhelming. And because this is a romantic comedy, it's a little more tolerable. At first glance, this might seem like a harem, but it's kind of like Sword Art Online or Excel World. There's a TV trope supporting harem, where multiple girls are interested in a guy, but he's only interested in one girl, which is fine. Pretty much everyone in this show has the hots for Icky, but not only is he only interested in one girl, but they get engaged. I'm not sure if him and Stella are married in the light novel yet, or they're just fiancés. So that being said, maybe let's just start talking about it. So our main character is Icky, who I really like a lot. I'm going to do a video at some point. I've just kind of been kicking around in my head, kind of in praise of the anime Delta Male. So if you go by Vox Day's autistic description of the sociosexual hierarchy, you have the Delta Male. And the Delta Male is just your normal, reliable, salt-of-the-earth guy. He's the kind of guy who punches in, punches out. He's doesn't really have a desire to be like a Chad or a leader or something like that. But he's just kind of a fundamentally decent person who's kind of content not being the top of the sociosexual hierarchy or being in the leadership of society, but wants to contribute it to it and wants to try to kind of, as best as he can, be a decent person. I tend to describe myself as a Delta male, but we can get into that in some other time. But the point is, in a lot of, I think, well done romantic comedy animes, I like it when you have that kind of main character. And sometimes they're not like mediocre, like Ryuji in Toradora is really smart and very successful in school. I forget his actual name, but Rusian in You Never Thought There Was a Girl Online is actually really good looking. But their kind of defining feature is they're a nice guy. Like, they're an actual nice guy. They're just a really solid stand-up dude who's there for the girls in the story, who's nice to them, although normally they won't put up with their bullshit, hopefully. But just a solid dude. And I really appreciate that, because I think that's a reinforcing positive social norms. Because there is this whole, like, nice guy thing. And I think there's two kind of areas where that comes from. There's firstly the whole women who don't get married, and they try to justify their bad life choices by saying all the guys they turned down because they thought they could do better were just nice guys and they were trying to screw with them. There's also kind of Pua who does that, but let's get back to the show. I'm kind of all over the place, but that's kind of the point of these reviews, is they're supposed to kind of be covering the themes. So our main character is Icky, and he's kind of the perpetual underdog. So I don't know if I'd exactly call him a Delta male, because he's kind of more of a Chad, but he's kind of very polite and nice and helpful and stuff like that. So Chivalry of a Failed Knight takes place in a world where there's people called Blazers, and they have magical powers and they have devices. I find it a little confusing now that I'm trying to think about it. I think the devices are pre-existing, but they have certain compatibility levels with different people, depending on the individual's mana and that sort of thing. So Icky, I'm not sure if he doesn't have any mana or he has a specific type of it, but he can't use really advanced mana. He can do a lot of physical things, like he's extremely fast and very strong, but he can't do a lot of the stuff that other people can do, like flamethrowers or laser beams or turn invisible or teleport. So he very much has to rely on intelligence and skill, which I like that. I like int heroes like Lelouch or something. I mean, I also like heroes that are just really strong, like Naruto, but it is kind of refreshing because when he fights opponents, he has to try to outsmart them, and his entire sword style is based on analyzing his opponent's fighting style, finding flaws in it, and overcoming them that way. So that's pretty interesting. And his ultimate ability, I think it's called Intetsu, where he uses all of his strength for the day in a 1-minute burst. So generally speaking, he comes up with his plan and then uses that to knock the person out. So I do appreciate that. That's an interesting part of the show. So because he can't use mana and he comes from a very prominent, I don't know if you want to call him samurai or warrior family, he's kind of the black sheep of the family. He's in Blazer school, but he basically fails all of his grades. Not because he isn't smart. He's probably really smarter than like 90% of the people at the school. And he's very skilled in swordsmanship, but he doesn't really have the raw mana power that you're mostly evaluated on. So even though his combat abilities, like if he fights people, he almost always wins. That doesn't really matter because his actual mana is low. So his grades are based on that. So that's Icky. And then you have the other protagonist, Icky's love interest, Estella or Stella Vermilion, who is a princess, I believe from I think it's called the Vermilion Empire. It's not particularly important, but yeah, she's a princess. And kind of the series starts out, and I kind of was really skeptical because you kind of had one of those tropes I really hate, where the guy accidentally walks on the girl changing, and then she like beats him up, and it's like fake drama. But it kind of like doesn't go in that direction, so I really recommend getting through the first episode or two if you're going to watch this, because it's just kind of a I don't know if it's a trope buster, but it doesn't go in a really shitty direction. So Stella is his roommate, and Stella is kind of one of those, I don't know if you want to call her like absurdly hot. There's a lot of ecchi involving her. She's just very voluptuous, and she has a very fiery temper. It's not like she's a bad person or she's abusive towards Icky or anything like that, but she's just a very passionate person, and her power is flames. And I think she's S rank because she just has a lot of natural mana, but she also works extremely hard. However, like most really powerful people, Icky can beat her. I think it's a bit like in Harry Potter, where wizards are so reliant on magic that they don't really have common sense or logic anymore. So they don't really use they don't use magic in what would be, to I guess, a muggle, a really obvious way, like in terms of combat or to do certain things. It just doesn't occur to them. But because Icky's like an int fighter in a world where everyone's either a dex or strength fighter, that's very effective. So he walks in on her, and she goes to the principal, headmistress of the school, and says that Icky was spying on her and he was a pervert, which he of course denies. So she challenges him to a duel where the winner becomes the loser becomes the winner's servant for the rest of their lives. And Icky of course wins, and she expects him to, well, because she's really hot and Icky's a heterosexual teenager, to take advantage of the situation. But he just says, look, I just want you to show around campus. I want you to be my friend and my roommate. And I kind of just want us to get along together. Which I thought was pretty wholesome. Once again, Icky's just a really solid dude. And I like that aspect of it. So pretty early on, because he's such a nice guy, Stella almost immediately starts to fall in love with him. Most of the girls do, just because he has a very polite, helpful personality. Like, he winds up tutoring a lot of the students in kind of his sword style and his techniques, just because his form is so much better than theirs, since that's his focus. And pretty much anyone who comes to him and asks for his help, he tends to help them. So his sister shows up, and she's obviously in love with him, and unlike a lot of shows, he's just really creeped out by it. Like, the incest really bothers him, and she's like kind of lolly, and she gets into constant fights with Stella. But we kind of have some good episodes, the early ones, etc. Icky has to beat, it's called like the Seven Sword Festival. I forget if it's Seven Sword Art Festival or something like that, but they have to, Icky to graduate has to qualify and win the festival. And the agreement is that would be such a massive achievement that despite his grades being the lowest in the school, he would still be allowed to kind of go through. And so I think, sorry, I'm just trying to remember. I don't have notes in front of me, obviously. So they have an episode where there's a hostage situation, and I forget if Stella saves Icky or Icky saves Stella. But Stella kind of confesses her feelings to him, and he accepts them. And pretty early on, they become boyfriend and girlfriend. And there's like no real drama over it. Stella just develops feelings for Icky. He accepts them. And that's pretty much it. There's not really a lot of drama around it. There's drama around people trying to split them up. But I like that there's not a love triangle. There's not like harem. There's not all this random shit. And the relationship is pretty wholesome despite living together. So Stella being a horny teenage girl and Icky being like a Chad and really good looking, she kind of wants him to take advantage of her. But despite them being boyfriend and girlfriend, they just go out on dates. He doesn't really do anything more than, I forget if he just gives her like kisses on the cheek or something. But he's very much like, doesn't try to cop a feel or anything. And she kind of wishes that he did. And there's like the swimsuit episode where she wears like a bikini with her big boobs, and she's trying to like get him to ogle her. And she yells at him and she's like, why don't you look at me? And he's like, because I don't want to objectify you, because I want us to have a real relationship that's not just based on sex and stuff like that. And I'm trying to be a gentleman. And I think that's pretty sweet. I mean, it's not really that he's a pussy or anything. He's just trying to do right by her. He doesn't want it to be just kind of a fling or something. He has real feelings for her. And later on in this season, and I think they go back on in the light novel, but there's a part where they get stuck in the forest and they both get really soaked and are going to develop illness. So they go into a cabin and they're both naked because they're drying their clothes, and Stella offers to have sex with Icky. And Icky's like, no, I can't do that, especially because you're a princess. I want to meet your family and like ask your father permission to marry you. And I'm just like, that is unbelievably based. He's just like, no, I won't bespoil your honor or anything like that. And actually later on, they try to accuse him of it anyways. And the series ends with him proposing to her. Now, I think in the light novel, he kind of reneges on that and they wind up having sex. But as far as I can determine, that's a different continuity. But I think it's pretty based. That he's pursuing an actual relationship and that he's not a pussy about it. And that he's like a nice guy, but he's a nice guy in like a Chad way. So overall, I think it's really good. There's a lot of good fight scenes. There's a lot of like side plots and drama that goes on, but I largely like that. Once again, there's fan service, but it's not like a extreme or really like, it doesn't really detract from it, which is a really good thing in and of itself. But yeah, like it gets really dark near the end where like Icky gets like captured and put into a cell, and I didn't entirely understand it, but people are just trying to break them up and things like that. So overall, I think Chivalry of a Failed Knight is a really solid series. It's probably not for everyone, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'd recommend it. If you're looking for something, just keep in mind, some people don't really like fan service, so there's a fair amount of it. And I guess some people might think it's sort of generic, but that's my review. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless.